Hello everybody, we are Brigade of Beans, a diagnosed dissociative identity disorder system. My name is Ashtel, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about system mapping. What is system mapping? For those with dissociative identity disorder and otherwise specified dissociative disorder, system mapping can be a vital tool in furthering your understanding of the system and building communication with each other. There is no one specific way that system mapping looks. It can look however works best for you and your system. However, we have created several different examples that we will go through in this video, and I've also made a list of other examples and also other things that you can use to map your system. I also need to give a shout out that this first one here about where alters are in the body is inspired directly by Garden System from a couple of multiples, and I will be attaching their podcast in the description, which you should all go and check out. It is a very, very good podcast. I also needed a couple of tutorials for some of the later system maps on how to actually fold them and create them. So those tutorials will also be down in the description for how to make them yourselves. All of the examples that we're going to go through are fictional and are not representations of our own or anyone else's system, just because system mapping can be quite personal, and so it was easier for us just to use fictional examples. So in example 1 over here, we have where different alters feel within the physical body. It is quite common for systems to feel different alters be present in different parts of their body. When you're doing the actual drawing, you can do it in as much or as little detail as you want. It also doesn't have to be a full body. If you do not feel alters in your full body, there's no point doing that. But if you are somebody who feels them in different parts of your brain, you can draw a picture of the brain or of the head and draw where alters are in its relation to the face and the head. But in this example, you can see that the man is felt within the system's throat. So when he's fronting, there would probably be a tightness or a presence in their throat and in their neck. Luna is in their heart. So potentially this means that Luna either might hold on to a lot of positive emotions that you can feel in your heart, or might hold on to something like heartburn, or is just felt in that part of the body in a way that is beyond description, in a way that normally applies to how you feel in the physical body. There can also be alters who feel like they are outside of the body. You might have an alter like Tyler here, who is above the body, who is removed from the body. Or you can have an alter like Trinity, who is also outside of the body, but might actually be more grounded than the system because she is connected with ground and earth and solidness. Example number 2 that we have is a split map. So this is a timeline of who split when and who split off of who. This is very, very hard to do in practice. It can be very, very difficult to work out who split from who, especially if it is somebody who split from multiple people, and especially if you're very early on in your system discovery. I would not recommend doing this type of system map early on, but it can be one that becomes more easy to do with more progress, with more understanding of the system. But this is one that would probably take a long time to chip away at, rather than this one that you might be able to work on over a couple of days or even a couple of hours, depending on how good your communication is on a given day. But you can see up here that I have 3 alters who they have a little date on them. I'm not sure how well the camera picks it up, but they are all from 2001. So they have existed since the body was born. And then there is nobody who is split off of Avery. Avery is just the same as when they formed. Then off of Evan, we had Ophelia split in 2003, and then Dennis split in 2012. Off of Ophelia in 2005 was Willow, and then off of Willow in 2005 was Courtney, and then off of Courtney in 2006 was Blake, and just so on, and through that entire map of who split when. You can, when you're making a map like this, take note of specific life events that took place. So you might be like, in 2007 we started school, or in 2012 our parents divorced. Whatever events took place, and you might note that on the bottom. You can also do a split map laid out like a linear timeline. So you start with 2001, 2002, 2003, and you just write down who was active throughout those years. And if an alter goes dormant, you could write them below the timeline. And those are the first 2 examples. I'm now going to move on to example 3. Example number 3, the interpersonal connections between different alters. So here I have used different colors to signify different types of interpersonal relationships that alters can have. So we have siblings, we have protectors, or who protects who, we have dislikes, we have cares for, and then we have dating. So we can see that Arthur, Grace, and Newt are all siblings. We can see that Queen and Kylie dislike each other, And with this directional arrow, we can see that 7 dislikes Queen, but Queen doesn't dislike 7. These can get very, very complicated, especially the more and more alters you have in your system, the harder and harder it is to draw maps like this. So we would normally break it down into different groups because our system is quite large. So we wouldn't have a map like this of our entire system, but we might have a map like this between our frequent fronters or between a specific group of caretakers and their wards. So this is still an example of tracking the internal relationships between parts. But in this one, I have given more information about the alters on this particular piece of paper and then used black lines and then captioned what each of their interpersonal relationships are. So we can see that Rusty and Robin are brothers. This should be going both ways. We can see that Brian and Rusty work together. We can see that Brian protects Mel. We can see that Mel and Olives are siblings and that Selena cares for Olive. And you can see that all of these complex interpersonal relationships at play. And again, hard to do with a larger number of alters, easier to break it down into groups if you have a very large system. This is example number 4, and this is what we think of first when we first heard about system mapping, and this is drawing a map of the inner world. Drawing maps of the inner world become more and more complex the more and more complex your inner world is. And it's also more complex if you do not have a stagnant inner world, if you do not have a very defined inner world, or if you do not have access to your inner world. And so maps like these are not possible for everyone. So when we were first discovering our system and we didn't have an inner world, we just made up what we thought our inner world would look like. And so whilst these maps can be very, very helpful, especially for systems who already have a defined inner world, if you don't have one, if you're still working on developing yours or accessing yours, these can be quite hard to do, which is why we have given other forms of system mapping as well. But this is kind of the classic. So within this system, they have front, which is accessed from this room. And there are 6 alters who are primarily in that room. Just because an alter is listed as being in a room does not mean they are always there, but it is where their primary location is. It's where they are most likely to spend the most time. It's where they call home, that sort of thing. So off of the front room, there is in a hallway. The hallway has 2 rooms off of it, which each hold sets of alters. And they have a couple of cupboards at the end where there are babies in those cupboards. And then in the hallway, there is an alter called Guardian who watches over the vulnerable parts who are in that other part of this building. We then have an outside area where there is a forest. There are 3 alters who live in the forest, and then there are 2 houses which have S and Q in them respectively. These drawings do not have to be to scale. These trees would theoretically be probably bigger than a front room, but you don't have to worry about being perfect. You don't have to worry about being an artist. It's just about getting an impression of what is going on down on paper. The next kind of system map that we have is a front map. So this will change a lot because this particular map is depicting who is near front at the time that the map is being drawn. So in this central circle, you have the alters who are actually fronting, who are present completely in the body. And in this situation, there are 3 alters co-fronting. There are 2 alters who are known about, who know they are there. And there is a third presence. It is known that there is a third alter in the body, but Holly and Beth do not know who that is. They cannot identify who that is. So there's just a question mark. The next ring here is co-consciousness. So these are your alters who are co-conscious, who are having communication with front and who are observing front, but who are not actually in the body. And there are several alters here. There is again an alter who is presence can be sensed, but who they specifically are isn't known. And they all exist to different degrees within co-consciousness. You can also add more circles if your system experiences multiple layers to co-consciousness. Like maybe there are alters who are only observing but cannot communicate to front, and then there are alters who can communicate and can observe. Then you might add another circle in there to depict that as well. And then outside of that, you have alters who can be reached out to, but who are not fronting and who are not co-conscious. But if you were to sit down and you were to reach out and you were to go, can Pillow hear me? I am calling out for Pillow. I'm trying to reach Pillow. You would be able to build that connection. So you can sense that Pillow is somewhere near enough to front to communicate with, but not near enough to front to be aware of what is going on. And those are all the alters who are in the outer circle. Or not even the circle, just outer vibe space. We're now on to our final 2D example of a system map, and this is drawing groups. So if you are like us and you have a larger system where it is a lot harder to map out every single individual alter, but you are in defined groups, you can draw those groups. So in this example, I've just put the number of alters who are in a given group, but you can write down each independent alter's name if you want to. So in this system, there is the top layer, and there's 25 plus alters in that area. There is at least 25. There is then around that layer that entirely surrounds it, the basement, and there are at least 50 alters in that basement. Off of the basement, there are 3 groups. The ocean, which has at least 40 alters, the aquarium, which is connected to the basement and the ocean, which has 17, and then the park, which is connected to the basement, the aquarium, and the woods, but it's not connected to the ocean. So an alter here would be able to communicate with the basement, the aquarium, or the woods, but wouldn't be able to communicate with the top layer and wouldn't be able to communicate with the ocean. The woods is home to 200 plus fragments, and then entirely disconnected from that main grouping, you have the fortress, which has at least 12 alters, and the zoo, which has at least 50 alters. And they are entirely disconnected, and likely the only communication this system has with these 2 groups is through external communication and external people either telling them about them or alters from these groups leaving messages about themselves. But we tend to do one of these maps with each of the groups, and then for each of those groups we'll then do a more specific map using one of the other styles underneath it. And we do most of our own maps in A4. It's just easier to display these on A3 pieces of paper, and then we keep them in a clear binder where we can rearrange the pages and where we can keep track of how our system has changed over time. So those were all of our 2D examples of a system map that you can make with a pen and paper, and we have made 2 more 3D examples with paper and pencil as well. The first is this 3D landscape. There is a video in the description about how to make one of these. And this is a depiction of what an inner world might look like that has, again, more layers. And it goes further and further back into the headspace. So at the front layer, closest to front, we have the main house, we have the fronting car, and we have Owl's tree. We then behind that have the pine forest and the water fountain. And as you can see, the pine forest is visible from front, but the water fountain is more hidden. You can also, on the back of these, add a description of more information, or you can draw more layers. So if there is someone, say, if you have a house and then you have a basement beneath the house, you can draw that on the backside of this piece of paper as an example. Behind the pine forest, we then have the castle, the moat, and the oak forest, and there would be more altars here. And then at the very, very back of the system, we then have the prison cave, the river, the lake, and the eagle's nest. And then these would be the altars who are furthest back from front. And that is a way that you can create a system map that has some more dimension and shows the different layers a little bit more visually. And you can also, if you're like displaying this somewhere, create little cutouts and add more layers or have them floating above, like if there are people who live in the clouds or if there are people who live underground or something like that. And the second one might be a familiar little shape, and it's one of these fortune tellers that people tend to make in like primary school. And again, there's a video tag in the description of how to make one of these. But this can be another good way to show the layers of a system, especially if you are a system who has a lot of subsystems and who has alters who are connected to specific alters. But within this example that I've drawn, there are 4 surface alters. You can add as many names as you want to each of these layers. And then inside that, there are more alters. So there is Quentin, there's Isabel, Harry, Raven, and then another 4. And then they're kind of visible if you go looking. And then when you really open it up, when you really peel it back, underneath each of these pieces of paper, there are then even more alters who are further hidden away. And that can be a way to, this only really goes to 3 layers, but can describe 3 different layers within the system. And if you want, you can even draw it on the bottom as well, especially if you are a system who has a reverse side of the system. Even with a map like this, with an inner world map, if you are a system who has a reverse side, which for us, the endless lakes are a reverse side of our system, you can draw it on the back. Not on the back of this one because we use marker, but if you use something that doesn't bleed through paper, you can then draw that on the back of that piece of paper. Hi everybody, it's Flower. Now let's discuss the different kinds of system maps you can create that do not rely on paper and a pen. The first one is to use a corkboard. If you print out a bunch of different images or even just the names of different alters in your system, you can then pin them to a corkboard. You can then lay them out with those who have good communication being closer to each other and those with less communication being further away. You can also go like full crime solving, like stereotype corkboard and put different colored strings between them to differentiate different kinds of internal relationships, but that isn't necessary. But that can also help to demonstrate the kinds of connections that alters have within the system. The advantage of using corkboard and pins is that you can move it around as inevitably the system changes and evolves, and either new alters are discovered or better communication is built between parts, and you can move people closer together or further away, or add new people or take people away as their views as needed. Another dynamic system map that you can use is to create a diorama. So you could use something like a shoebox and then create little stick people for different alters in the system. You could use Lego and build your inner world with Lego and use different Lego figures for different alters. You can use animal figurines. You could even just use teddies and place them around to picture where different alters are, and then take a photo of that and then write on that photo different alters and their relationships to each other. There are so many different ways that you can use to demonstrate your system. And not all of it has to be in the physical world either. You can go digital. If you are a digital artist, you can draw your inner world. You can use things like Pinterest boards to create different folders that depict different parts of the inner world and depict different things that different alters are interested in or their aesthetics. And then you can group these different Pinterest boards into folders and then open up the folders and then see the alters that are in these different folders and in these different areas of the inner world. You can use apps like Obsidian or Mindly or any kind of mind map cloud making app where you can draw different lines between different alters, and you can again use that to demonstrate the internal relationships. You can use that to demonstrate who's split off of who. You can use that to demonstrate alters with different roles and color code it in that way. There are so many different things that you can use to map your system, and some really fun ways to map your system include using games. If you are somebody who enjoys The Sims or enjoys Minecraft or enjoys similar games like that where you have a creative free build option, you can make your inner world in there and then place different alters in them. If you are a Minecrafter like ourselves, although we're not a builder, you can create your inner world in as much detail or as little detail as you want. We tend to just use boxes, we don't build the full houses, and then place signs with different alters information or place different mobs in there. You can turn the AI off if you're using cheats and name tag them, or you can use armor stands and use different dyed leather to differentiate different alters within the inner world. Very similar to that, if you play The Sims, you can create your inner world in The Sims, especially if it's a house or a neighborhood, and you can build that in the build mode, and you can also create different alters as Sims, and you can use cheats to allow you to add more than 8 Sims to a household. And you can't place Sims specifically in different parts of that house, but it can be a good way to build what the inner world looks like, which is a form of system mapping. And the final question that I want to answer is, what's the point of system mapping? Why bother doing it? And for some systems, it's not going to be worth it, but it can be a great way to build your internal communication and to build trust between alters, respecting what they are comfortable sharing and only noting down what they're comfortable sharing, but also learning about them and giving them creative outlets to express themselves, such as building their space in The Sims or creating a Pinterest board of it or drawing pictures of themselves, and learning about what different alters enjoy. Learning the different ways that they feel comfortable to express themselves can help build that communication between parts. It also helps you know who can get messages to who. If you have a system that has more complicated internal communication, you might be able to look at your system map and go, okay, I have communication with Astral. Astral has communication with Gale. Gale has communication with Magnus. And Magnus has communication with Cryptic. And I can pass along that line of communication rather than just fruitlessly trying to get to Cryptic when there's too many barriers between you. That isn't how our system works. That's not how communication in our system works. That was just using us as an example. I can pretty easily get in contact with Cryptic, or at least I can get in contact with Astral, who can get in contact with Cryptic. It can also help people outside of the system understand you. So it might help your therapist understand better. It might help loved ones understand better. It might help other care professionals that you have understand better. And it can be a way to describe your internal experiences and to give people some insight into what your daily basis is like. And at least for us, feeling seen and feeling understood is really important to us feeling safe and feeling a sense of belonging. And so being able to make system maps that other people understand can be really helpful. I hope that these ideas were helpful. I hope that it gives people who maybe haven't found system mapping doable for themselves. It might give you some more ideas. But if system mapping isn't possible for you, that's okay. It can be a lot of work. It can be really discombobulating to do. And it's okay if it's just not something you can do by yourselves or at all. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!